Hi, friend, and welcome back to Marvelous Friends, your home for all things Marvel Cinematic Universe and beyond. I'm Rhett, and today I am starting off my 5 and 5 review series by season of X-Men the Animated Series. So let's get started with Season 1. Roll that credit. With all this extra time on my hands and with me being bedridden for a few days due to a bad case of vertigo that I got a couple weeks ago, I decided to hit up Disney Plus and revisit some nostalgia and watch the entire X-Men the Animated Series. And of course, now I need to discuss that with you all. And I hope you are ready to do so. I decided to go ahead and do this by season rather than episode, and so I'm going to kind of just do this way for each of the seasons. I'm of course going to do my traditional 5 and 5 review format. So that's 5 positives and 5 negatives about each of the season in my opinion. However, I am going to just quickly review the season synopsis for you guys and kind of run through what actually happens in the season. Now again, this is based upon how the show runs based upon the order on Disney Plus. So if you have any questions about the order, you can check out this video up in the card, and it'll explain some more about that, and I will touch on that in my list as well. With that being said, let's jump into the actual synopsis real quick and summary of what happens in Season 1 of X-Men the Animated Series. The season starts off with our introduction of the main issue of the season, and that is the Sentinels. Now, these are being created and sent out to round up mutants by a group led by Senator Kelly, and he is getting the mutants off of the registration list that was put in place as part of a greater act of help to mutants. Now, we take a break from this after that episode in the season to go introduce some of our long-term characters. This includes Magneto and his followers, the Brotherhood, as well as a group of mutants who have been forced to live underground in the sewers of New York City called the Mortlocks. We return to our main programming, though, as we follow some of the X-Men being captured in the Republic of Genosha, and the same people who are behind the Sentinels are enslaving mutants there. While the X-Men are distracted with this, the Juggernaut destroys the mansion, and then we jump into the Four Horsemen of Apocalypse storyline, and we eventually are able to stop Apocalypse, who ties everything back in because it turns out that he was actually behind the Sentinels all along and was manipulating Senator Kelly. When he is taken down, Master Mold turns on its creators, using the Sentinels themselves to actually start rounding up humans in hopes to create a better world in its own vision. So that means that the X-Men and Magneto must team up to stop Master Mold and save Senator Kelly, which they are able to save the day in the end. And Senator Kelly, who has been a long-term opponent of the mutants, actually comes around and decides to be an ally to some of them. He isn't necessarily on board with all mutants, still believing that many of them out there are dangerous. However, some mutants can be used for the benefit of mankind. The season ends with a teaser of Mr. Sinister watching Jean and Scott on a screen. Now that you know what happened in season 1, let's actually talk about it. As always, I'm going to start off with my 5 least favorite things about the season. Number 5, the animation doesn't hold up. Honestly, I will admit this isn't all that fair considering this is from a good while ago now, but I have been rather nostalgic over the last few years and went back and rewatched a lot of the programs from when I was a kid, and some of the animations specifically are still pretty good animations even compared to some of the stuff that's out today. And this one just didn't hold up as much as I remembered it to. And that is the key here, is, in my opinion, just based upon how I remember it versus how it actually is now watching it as an adult. Now, I will give credit to the artist and the artistic director of the series. I know there was a very particular style and look that it was going for, and I respect that. It's just that when watching as an adult, some things were kind of distracting, like the multiple vanishing points, the overly dark colors, and kind of the just general rough animation and movement of the character flow in the animation. And it, like I said, at times it was a little distracting. And that is my opinion. And because sometimes things just aren't as good as you remember them to be when they were a kid. Because when I was a kid watching this, I thought it was amazing. Number 4, Jubilee's involvement. Now, I remember Jubilee being a part of the series when I was a kid, but I don't remember her being this big of a part of the main focus of the first season, at least. Now, it of course starts off with her recruitment and the X-Men saving her from the Sentinels, but then it just jumps into her being a full-fledged member of the X-Men, which is odd. She hasn't received any training, and she's much younger than the rest of the group. And it's only made that much more odd when you realize that she is the only young student that ever is featured in the first season and the rest of the series. Now, I don't know why this is and why I didn't notice this as a kid, but it just seems odd now watching it as an adult. And it just seems like not a good idea, especially considering, for example, in season 1, when they all leave her behind to guard Sabretooth. That seems highly irresponsible to leave a 15, 16-year-old. I'm confused at how old she is as well, because I think it changes a few times throughout the series. But besides that, it's just, she seems like she doesn't belong as someone so young. And I guess I just assumed that she was the same age as everyone else when I was younger, but that is clearly not the case. Number 3, other hero representation. Why do all the other heroes seem to always appear in their costumes? This is most noticeable when we go to the episode entitled Enslavement, or whatever it was. I can't remember. But basically, it focuses on Gambit, Jubilee, and Storm being captured and held as slaves in the Republic of Genosha. And here we see many of the extended members of the X-Men family, both friend and foe. However, they are all represented in their costumes. Now, I'm sure this was done to allow us to quickly recognize them from the comic books, but it just seems a little odd that they're always just walking around in their costumes. And I would say this is weird, but it's not always the case, as we often see some of our characters out and about doing things in regular street clothes. We didn't necessarily need to know that the other characters in the background were mutants or specific heroes. We knew they were mutants, excuse me, but why were they in their costumes? It just seems silly, especially when you look at the fact that when they are captured, Gambit, Jubilee, and Storm are in vacation garb, and then once they are captured in the next scene, they're all of a sudden in their hero costume, which is weird. And it goes even further than that. Often we see Storm out and about doing things with her favorite gal pal, Rogue. And half the time, Storm is in regular street clothes, but Rogue is still sporting her regular everyday hero look. But not always. But about 50-50 chance. I guess that is, though, because Storm is the only one that seems to be able to manifest her costume with her powers, which is odd. It'd been kind of cool to see other people do that maybe, but Storm is the only one ever featured holding her hands up, being struck by lightning, and all of a sudden is in her classic white costume. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's very odd. I don't think I've ever remember her being called Aurora in this season either. She's always referred to by Storm, never Aurora. That's odd as well. Number 2, choppy storytelling. This seems really to jump from story to story without really fully exploring which each of them potentially has to offer from the comic books. Now, I get it. This show was made for kids, and that is kind of a shortened attention span. But if you look at today's modern kids programming for the same age group as this was back in the 90s, it's a lot more in depth today, and writers give kids a lot more credit for what they actually can handle. Now, of course, I'm also watching this as an adult, so I'm a little bit more critical than a kid is, and I, again, thought the stories were amazing as a kid. But now as an adult, I want more. I want them to explore these episodes and these stories in much more detail, rather than really glazing over them and then jumping to the next story. It also seems a little odd that they constantly do this because there's plenty of time to do so, even in that 20-minute time slot. They spend a good several minutes on last time on the episode, little intros at the beginning of every episode. So it's not like we couldn't refresh the important things to continue a longer spanning story. And plus, we see episodes that cross over multiple episodes. So why couldn't there just be a continual story that really threads the entire season together, rather than jumping from story to story to story? But again, I'm nitpicking as an adult watching a kids show. Number 1, the mixed up story. Now this is a completely different issue than number 2, I promise you, though this one makes number 2 slightly an issue as well, and might be at part fault for that. Because Disney Plus did not upload the episodes in order as they originally aired, and this I found out actually becomes a bigger issue as we move on throughout the series. And you can check out my video up in the card regarding that fact. Now, what I really like to say here is that it's not necessarily groundbreaking and just destroying of the storyline of the season or the small storyline that ties everything together, but it is noticeable, especially when we see those recaps from last time, and the recap that hasn't happened yet. We haven't seen that episode. And so it does kind of throw some of the things off. And like I said, that is probably partially why the episodes seem to be so segmented into small storylines, because some things got mixed up. Now, again, this becomes a bigger and bigger issue as we move on, so expect this probably to pop up on a list again. With the negatives out of the way, though, let's move on to some positives about the show. Number 5, the apocalypse twist. Now, there is a very thin shred of a continuing storyline throughout the episodes of season 1, and to find out that Apocalypse really was behind it all was a nice surprise watching this as an adult, because it's something I did not remember as a kid. When we learned that it's actually Apocalypse behind the Sentinels and Master Mold, not actually the humans led by Senator Kelly. So this was something really nice and kind of interesting when we learned that he's been working in the shadows all along and is our main big bad for the entire season. Again, though, that is a very fragile storyline, as it is very thin. And you really have to work to piece that together, in my opinion. But I did enjoy that kind of surprise twist, and it's something I don't remember. It's also something that's really nice in this comparatively to the X-Men movies that we received in the recent years, where Apocalypse was treated not that great. Putting him in a place like this where he is kind of the overarching in the background and then pops up to the foreground to make his big appearance was a lot more appreciative use of the character, I guess I could say, and I enjoyed it a lot. Number 4, Gambit. Gambit has been a character that has strongly been missed, by my opinion, in the representation of the past few installments of the X-Men that we have received. Now, yes, we got Gambit in the Wolverine Origins movie, but it was not a great representation in my mind. And I truly was looking forward to the Gambit film that was going to be headed by Channing Tatum. I can't believe I almost got that name wrong. But sadly, Tatum was not able to pull Ryan Reynolds and get it off the ground before Fox fell to Disney. So that is not going to be happening anytime soon, I would imagine. I hope that he does get some representation when we move forward in the future with the X-Men and the MCU. But in the meantime, I'm happy to have him in this cartoon again in the form that I most fondly remember. I'm also really happy to see Angel again. I really enjoyed both of these characters. They've been two of my long-term favorites of the X-Men and then the entire Marvel kind of pantheon of characters. Now, I also have to say that Angel's representation is a lot better in this series as well than his last two iterations in the films, and I hope he gets a bigger part in the MCU as well, especially considering he is an OG X-Men from the comic books, and I think that he deserves a lot better representation. However, again, his representation has been a lot better in the films than Gambit's has been. Number 3, references. They really packed a lot of Marvel into 13 20-minute episodes, and I'm really impressed with it. Now, I did mention that the storylines are short and kind of choppy at times, but really and truly, if you look at it, the number of references are really there. They're just not all that fleshed out. Now, this does tie a little bit into part 2, so I don't want to be too repetitive here, but it is just really kind of nice to see that they really reference so many things that show that there's so much more to X-Men and to Marvel than just what we see in this limited series. And I guess kind of the intention is to kind of get kids excited about it and then go read the comic books to learn more about the stories, which is what I did as a kid. I went and saw the series, and then when I was at the store, I would see the actual X-Men comics on this newsstand, and I'd be like, oh, I want to read this. And I would literally sit at the newsstand on the floor reading comic books while my mom was off doing the shopping, which that would never happen in today's world if you think about it. That's just crazy that my mom would just let me sit in the store by myself, unattended, reading comic books, not paying attention to anything going on around me. Wow, the times have changed. But for example, In the series, we see two kids running around with a video game that is about the Punisher. It's a nice reference to a character that's not even a mutant and a member of the X-Men, but part of the greater Marvel interconnected world. And that is what we love about Marvel, that interconnected idea of all these stories. Number two, so many heroes. Like I said, this does tie a little bit into number three, but it still felt enough that made it two separate things. There's just so many more characters in this series than I remember as a kid. Honestly, if you asked me before I started watching this again, I probably could have said, oh, it's just the named characters in the opening title, and then said a few of the bad guys that are recurring, like Apocalypse, Mr. Sinister, Mystique, and Magneto, and Sabretooth, and maybe a couple others, but I didn't realize just how many characters are actually in the series from the comic books, both named and even more unnamed, allowing me to realize that this is why I recognize some of these characters. And I know I criticized the fact that everyone always appears in their costume, but this again is part of that reason why I think it actually is that way, even though it bothers me. And that is, it's allowed me to recognize them. For example, the reason why I remembered Ghost Rider so much later when the Nicolas Cage films came out and I knew who that was is because he shows up in a flash of a memory of Gambit's during an episode. And there's other characters in the background that today I was like, oh yeah, that's where I first saw them, and that's why I recognized them when I finally got a name to the face. And it's just really crazy how much is compacted in there. That's why it's two different points on this list. But yeah, there's just so many of the characters in here, and it's just reminding me so many little things about my initial opinions about the characters as well. For example, why I just cannot stand Cyclops, aka Scott Summers. He is just an annoying Boy Scout, and when Logan says that line, okay, Boy Scout, I was like, that is why I always call him that. It just was little references and reminders about the characters themselves that I've just had this long-term reference to, and I couldn't always remember where it came from. But again, rewatching this as an adult, you pick up things that you just suddenly noticed as a kid. And number one, nostalgia holds up, which is obviously where I was heading to with this list. Obviously, everything about it is just me kind of oohing and awing about everything about the show from when I was a kid to where I was an adult. It really does hold up, despite the fact that the animation may not be the best as it could have been, even for the time period. I don't care. I love the show. Even though the storylines aren't as fleshed out as I would like them to be, it doesn't matter. I still love the show as an adult because it was such a big part of my childhood introduction to Marvel, and why to this day the X-Men are still my favorite within the Marvel universe, because that was my first introduction to Marvel at all, was this X-Men cartoon, and I love it to this day. It was such a joy rewatching it as an adult despite all the issues, and I cannot wait to finish watching this entire series. That is going to do it for my 5 and 5 review, though, of Season 1. Make sure to stick around, subscribe, and set those alerts for the rest of the series as I continue on in describing my thoughts of all the show. Now, I would love to know down in those comments if you have watched it or do you plan to watch it on Disney Plus now that it is available. If you have watched it, please let me know what your favorite things are about the show or what your least favorite things are about the show, specifically Season 1. And if you plan to watch it, since we talked about nostalgia, what is the best parts of the show that you remember if you were around when it was on as a kid? Again, down in those comments, I'd just love to hear you guys' thoughts about Season 1 of X-Men, the Animated Series. Of course, if you enjoyed this video and Season 1, give this video a like. I always do appreciate it, but that is going to do it for me today. I hope you all have a marvelous rest of your day. Bye, friend!